Not gonna lie, I'm a little disappointed that Disgaea wound up in last place. But hey, I've been meaning to cover Ogre Battle for a while now. I even got the Japan-exclusive Saturn port, supposedly the best version, in preparation for this moment. It being less than a third the price of Super Nintendo or PS1 copies also helped.
At last, you're becoming a crafty consumer. Hello? I'll take 8.
And there's no need to worry about the pesky fact that I can't read Japanese, as we've got ourselves a handy-dandy notebook. I mean, English patch. Good lord, how deep is Blue's Clues ingrained in my mind. However, thanks to a faulty video port and/or cable, I wasn't able to play the patched version directly on my Saturn and had to go the emulation route. For the record, because I've gotten comments about it before, I have no issue with emulation. In some cases, it's objectively the better way to play the game, like with WWF No Mercy. No worrying about the cart failing and resetting all your progress this way. The main reason I prefer using original hardware when I'm making a video on a game is simply to ensure I'm getting as close to the intended experience as I can. On the plus side, the game will look a lot less fuzzy than it would have if I'd used my usual daisy chain RGB switch box to upscaler to ancient-ass Elgato. Though because I was lazy and just used the Beetle Saturn RetroArch core, there's going to be a few UI bugs here and there. Mostly the backgrounds on the text boxes and mid-battle unit info being slightly offset. Now that we're all on the same page, let's get to the Ogre Battle. Ogre Battle, the March of the Black Queen, besides being named for 2 different Queen songs, was originally released in 1993 for the Super Famicom, with the North American release coming 2 years later, and was developed by Quest Corporation. The name may not be familiar to many, but if you've ever enjoyed the likes of Final Fantasy Tactics, Vagrant Story, Final Fantasy XII, Mad World, Crimson Shroud, Bravely Default, or Final Fantasy XIV, then you have Quest Corporation and Ogre Battle to thank for helping to bring the trio of Yasumi Matsuno, Akihiko Yoshida, and Hiroshi Minagawa to prominence. And then they put out Tactics Ogre in '95, and Square went, oh shit, we need these guys working for us right now. The Saturn port we're focusing on today was done by the even more forgotten developer Riverhill Soft, a company perhaps best known in the West for the hysterically awkward Overlord games.
Scream.
But they were capable of solid output as well, like the JB Harold Murder Club series. Not to mention being where Level 5's founder, Akihiro Hino, got his start. Any company that I can connect to Dark Cloud 2 in some way is alright in my book. Oh, and before I forget, the English patch is courtesy of these fine folks here. They went above and beyond with the script here, and instead of simply slapping the English script of the PS1 version in here and calling it a day, they rewrote a good portion of it to better align with lore and terminology established by the PSP version of Tactics Ogre. Ogre Battle may not be the most layered, dialogue-intense story out there, but going through all of it with a fine-toothed comb to make sure everything was consistent still had to be incredibly time-consuming. Fan translators are a different breed, man. Our tale is set on the continent of Xytegenia, a land once peacefully split between 5 kingdoms, which swiftly fell into the iron-fisted control of the sacred Xytegenian Empire after the assassination of the beloved King Gran of Zenobia. Ogre Battle cast you in the role of a warrior chosen by the wizard Merlin—
Oh yes,
Warren, to lead a rebellion against the Empire. And if a strategy RPG set on a continent divided between 5 kingdoms where you lead a rebellion against an empire which rose to power after the murder of a beloved monarch is starting to sound familiar to one of last year's biggest sleeper hits, what do you think Unicorn Overlord is a massive tribute to? But where Unicorn Overlord has a preset protagonist, Ogre Battle lets you choose between a male or female warrior whose starting unit and abilities are decided by the classic computer RPG system of answering multiple choice questions, with the questions here framed as Warren testing your worthiness to lead the rebels. I love it when games put this extra panache into making character creation feel like it's part of the world itself. Even if I do understand that not everyone enjoys it and would like to skip ahead to the stat crunching, I wish more modern games would incorporate stuff like this again. In an era where most games aren't designed to screw you over entirely if you build your character wrong at the start, this seems like one of those old, forgotten game features that could easily make a comeback and be seen as revolutionary again. Because I can, let's go with a heroine for this video. I even tried to be cute about it and name her after an identical character from Ogre Battle 64. The key word being tried. I don't know how I managed it, but I missed the second E in Europeia when I read it and wound up calling her Europa instead.
Me fail English? That's impossible.
Moving on to the gameplay proper, Ogre Battle is in a category all its own when it comes to strategy RPGs. Where the likes of Fire Emblem and Shining Force have each character as their own unit, and Langrisser has hero units supported by grunts, Ogre Battle has units composed of up to 5 normal-sized characters. Large characters take up 2 spots each on the cap, who fight together like the average party in a traditional RPG. In fact, the battles themselves are pretty much an automated version of what you'd see in many Super Nintendo RPGs, with the type of attack being determined by whether the character in question is in the front or back row. So don't go putting your wizards in the front if you want them casting spells. And to top off the distinctions from other strategy RPGs of the time, Ogre Battle's strategy side plays out as a free-moving RTS rather than the turn-based grid movement typical for the genre. Even with a small player unit cap of 10 per map, the real-time gameplay combined with the imprecise control of a D-pad compared to a mouse can make things feel quite hectic, particularly as the maps grow larger and larger the further you get in the game. Another piece of evidence supporting my long-held conspiratorial belief of a secret arms race between strategy RPG developers to see who could fill their game with the most gigantic, time-consuming maps and still achieve critical and commercial success.
Requesting permission to take the shot, sir.
Request denied.
Honestly, I'm actually kind of glad I wound up having to play this on an emulator so I could speed up parts of the game. Even after turning the combat animations off and setting the game speed as high as it could go, a single level could take close to 2 hours without hitting the turbo button every time a battle started. That's fine if you're playing it for fun, but it's a little stressful when you're trying to get your YouTube channel back on schedule and need to get through the game as soon as possible.
And I'm failing, and I'm sorry for that.
To the immense relief of the easily overwhelmed, i.e. me, Ogre Battle was ahead of its time in implementing the ability to actually pause the action and still issue orders. You'll be doing this quite often to keep an eye on the enemy units pouring out of their headquarters, as they can be sneaky little shits who will hide in the fog of war to sneak by you and attempt to recapture any unprotected cities you've liberated. Because of course the AI can see everything perfectly and knows where your units are at all times. These aspects gestate into a gameplay loop centered around a steady push towards the enemy's headquarters as you fend off hordes of cannon fodder, all the while liberating as many towns and temples as you can. If you're thinking that seems pretty simple, you haven't played Ogre Battle before. See, you can't just go around liberating towns all willy-nilly. No, you need to make sure that the unit doing the liberating has an appropriately high alignment so that your army's reputation, displayed here at all times, doesn't take a hit. Unless you don't care if you get a bad ending. But of course you care. You're not just gonna put all this time and effort into conquering this beast of a game just to wind up with your character dead in a ditch somewhere. So how do we do this? Is it like Tactics Ogre, where units come in law, neutral, and chaos forms?
No.
Instead, if you want a high alignment, those characters must consistently face units stronger than them and don't have a higher alignment. No power leveling for you, you naughty child. And doing this with your main character is paramount, as their alignment is one of the main things which determines what other characters you can recruit along the way. But you don't want to keep your hero hidden back home at all times either, as your starting alignment is determined by Warren's Teen Vogue personality quiz. And best of all, it's an instant game over if they die, even if you've got revival items on you. It's Aerith and the Phoenix Downs all over again. Note to self, investigate possibilities of Final Fantasy themed power metal band called Aerith and the Phoenix Downs. So you want to balance keeping the protagonist at a high enough level that they don't get wiped on an encounter without going so high that combat will drain their alignment and or charisma. Oh yeah, there's also a charisma stat that runs on similar rules. Though besides determining the strength of the units a leader can recruit and some unit promotions requiring a certain level of charisma for whatever reason, I don't know if it affects anything in combat. By the end I had leaders with 0 charisma and their units were still crushing fools left and right. Thankfully, you don't need to keep all your units at a high alignment, and in fact, it's a good idea to keep a mix. Save a few high alignment units for liberating towns, while the low and mixed alignment units clean house. Just make sure you don't let your wizards get too low of an alignment before promoting them to Goetics. Anything below 10 and they're too far gone to renegotiate their demonic pact. Neat little touch referencing medieval European beliefs regarding magic there. And I'm warning you about this in advance because goetics are the only ones who can be turned into necromancers, who can then become liches, who are overpowered beasts with 3 damaging area attacks per encounter. Warren's unit pretty much became my designated boss killer after his Skelly Boy upgrade, taking out more than a few of them in a single encounter. Which was only possible because I lucked out and got enough soul mirrors to pull his and a few other wizards' alignments out of the pits. Which is harder to do than you might think since extremely low alignments don't like going back up. On the bright side, extremely high ones don't like going back down either. You still shouldn't get too cocky though, because it will go down if you press your luck. If all that wasn't enough to wrap your head around, there is also a day-night cycle present where high alignment types will fight better in the daylight and low alignments will do the same at night. A time limit that will cost you reputation if you take too long on a map. But at least the Saturn version has the decency to show you how much time you've got left. Different movement types determined by which character classes make up the unit in question. Deployment and upkeep costs which need to be offset by income from the towns you liberate. Magic tarot cards which can be drawn when liberating a town. I learned not to bother with these because a bad draw will cause a big drop to your reputation. Usable items and equipment, including special items required for high-end class promotions. Buried treasure. A bevy of hidden towns and temples on almost every map which will often provide you hints or unique rewards, and the ability to revisit previous stages for items. Just don't let a full day pass or that's a paddlin'.
For your reputation.
Feeling stressed yet? I sure as shit was by this point.
I still wake up every night screaming.
With all that in mind, it'd be fair to assume that I didn't enjoy my time with Ogre Battle. But actually, once I understood that the real Ogre Battle was the complicated mechanics I had to learn along the way, the game really started to click for me, especially once I stopped being prideful and decided to keep a guide handy. It bears mentioning that Ogre Battle does its best to teach you the basics early on. It's just that this is one of those games where the basics alone will only get you so far, which I imagine is as designed, and Quest intended for this to be a game you play through multiple times until you know the full ins and outs. And I can appreciate that idea. I just don't have the time or focus that I did when I was a kid trying to 100% complete Budokai 3. So if using a cheat sheet or two helps me scale the sheer cliff face that is Ogre Battle's learning curve, then I'm using them. Because it's once you get up and over that learning cliff that Ogre Battle settles into a weirdly hypnotic groove. I can't figure out what it is specifically about it, whether it's the time sink of most levels, the satisfaction of continuing to overcome the game's complexity, or just the primal number go up that gets my ADD-ravaged brain all a-quiver with dopamine, but something here does the job. The one aspect I can point to and say with certainty played a big part in the appeal is Ogre Battle's fantastic demonstration of the nearly lost art of satisfying RPG progression. Watching your numbers going up is great and all, but you know what's better? Reaching a point where you're no longer the underdog, not on an even playing field with the AI, but an unfucking stoppable god of destruction laying waste to all in your path. And accomplishing that not through excessive grinding or exploits, but because that's how the game engineered its progression. What I'm trying to say is that level scaling is a scourge upon RPGs, and it's time we cut out the cancer with a rusty butter knife. Now onto the presentation. As this is simply a port of a 16-bit game to a 32-bit system, I'd prefer to judge the visuals as I would a Super Nintendo game rather than a Saturn title. Otherwise, Dragon Force would blow it out of the water, or more likely drag it through the fire and flames.
Oh, this guy's hilarious.
Viewing Ogre Battle as a slightly enhanced SNES title, I'm not surprised 2 of the artists on this game went on to work for Square. With its vibrant overworld maps and character sprites which managed to strike a balance between cartoony and cool, Ogre Battle was already well on its way towards replicating that quintessentially Square style of pixel art. Which is made more amusing when you remember that this style would go on to supplant Square's classic 2D style for well over a decade thanks to Final Fantasy Tactics. The advent of 3D spelled doom for countless 2D art styles, but for Yoshida and Minagawa, it just made them stronger. That being said, I ran into a similar problem as I did with Suikoden 3's visuals. That problem being that the portraits and in-game assets do not mesh well with each other. Yeah, that's about the response I expected. For starters, I want to make it clear that I love Akihiro Yoshida's work. He's right up there with Yoshitaka Amano when it comes to beautiful, elegant character design. Yet Yoshida's preference for less saturated, wintry colors in his art hits a brick wall of sorts when placed atop the bright, happy summertime land that is the sprite work. And, similar to Yoshida, Minagawa and his team's work with the sprites is fantastic, demonstrating an excellent understanding of how to create distinct silhouettes for each class so that the player can recognize them at a glance. And even when talking about a game where the action can be paused at a moment's notice, that is an essential yet all too often overlooked part of making a good strategy game. I've been watching videos of artists talk about character design, so I'm all learned and expertacular now. On their own, both the portraits and sprites are great. It's only when they're put together that there's a disconnect. Something I think that they eventually realized as a short jaunt over to Tactics Ogre shows us a much more cohesive implementation. Amazing the difference that a small change of color palette can make, isn't it? Moving on to the music, and I don't know, maybe I'm the crazy one here.
Most likely.
But the best I can say about Ogre Battle's soundtrack is that it's about what I'd expect from any console RPG of the time. Which means that it's still pretty good, mind you. Some of the slower songs are actually quite lovely. It's just that Ogre Battle comes from a time when great RPG soundtracks flowed like wine. Pretty good isn't all that memorable when you're competing against these heavy hitters. Confounding matters for me is that this soundtrack was done by the trio of Masaharu Iwata, Hitoshi Sakamoto, and Hayato Matsuo. Besides reuniting for Ogre Battle 64, where, even on a quick listen, I find the music to be a significant improvement, all three men have had a hand in far better soundtracks one way or another. Iwata is notable as one of the few non-Sega composers capable of creating great music on the Genesis, having created Gauntlet 4's underrated soundtrack the same year as Ogre Battle, and later on he'd be responsible for the sonic mindfuck that is Baroque's OST. Sakamoto would go on to found Bass Escape, through which he's become Vanillaware's go-to music man from Grim Grimoire onwards. Oh, and he also did the music for some old forgotten shoot-em-up called Radiant Silvergun. Don't know if that means anything to anyone. Matsuo is sort of the odd man out here in comparison, having mostly kept to the far less sexy yet no less important role of an arranger. Then you look and see what he's done arrangements for: Magic Knight Rayearth, Nights into Dreams, Panzer Dragoon Saga, Shenmue, and you wind up seriously hoping that this guy gets good royalty checks from Sega. All this without getting into the games Iwata and Sakamoto did as a pair like Tactics Ogre and Final Fantasy Tactics, or all three reuniting for Final Fantasy XII. Seriously, it's practically an unending list of games where all I need to do is see the title and go, the music is so great in that one. Yet somehow Ogre Battle's soundtrack doesn't provoke any bigger reaction from me than,
It was just good.
and where that would be the end of the discussion were I covering the SNES or PS1 version, the Saturn edition of Ogre Battle also comes with voice acting.
私はカノープスの妹、ユーリアです。
Though I'm not entirely sure of how much I can truly critique it when I can't speak the language. Despite what the kind of English as a first language people who call themselves otaku without a hint of irony or shame seem to think, the fact that I've been watching subbed anime since I was a kid does not make me an expert on Japanese voice acting. I couldn't even tell how intentionally over the top most of the acting in anime was until I started watching Kurosawa movies in my late teens. And so, rather than embarrassing myself in a futile attempt to critique voice acting in a language I don't understand, I can now admit that this was just a really roundabout way of telling you to watch Stray Dog. Moving on to the story writing, we have what I would describe as a workman's story, in that Ogre Battle sticks to a straightforward narrative to keep the player engaged with the game without taking a whole lot of risks. You're the leader of a rebellion seeking to overthrow an evil empire led by an evil Empress. She was a queen before she took over the continent, so she can still technically be called the Black Queen, who is flanked by an evil Black Knight Enforcer and an even more evil sorcerer with his own secret evil plans of evilness. Pretty standard stuff even for the time, but it works. And to Ogre Battle's credit, there are conversations which flesh out the backstory and explain that the main villains weren't always evil for the sake of being evil. Now, where I feel Ogre Battle could have done more is with the characterization of your allies. Most of the time, once you recruit a character, that's it for their dialogue for the rest of the game, save for a unique boss dialogue here or there. It leaves much of the cast feeling very flat. Admittedly, part of this comes from me being a massive Fire Emblem fan who adores the support system. I swear half the appeal of this series comes from pairing up various characters and seeing their interactions.
Did you see anything? No, sir. I didn't see you playing with your dolls again. Good!
Yet even a cutscene here and there of major recruitable characters like Lancelot, Tristan, or Rowney talking with your hero would have done wonders. It's the sort of could-have-been better thing that shows how Yasumi Matsuo was still finding his footing as a writer around this time. Not that it took him long to find it though, seeing as how strong character writing would become a staple of his stories as soon as Tactics Ogre. His penchant for a multitude of endings, on the other hand, that definitely started here. Featuring a whopping 13 different endings with their own unlock requirements, it's hard to say that this game lacks for replay value, that's for sure. The basic ones simply require you to keep your reputation above or below a certain threshold, but the others add on more requirements like needing specific recruits, which can be its own can of worms to figure out without a guide. And then there's the world ending. Insert your own JoJo's reference here. Which is the true ending and the one used by Tactics Ogre and Ogre Battle 64. Being a true ending to an old RPG, it naturally entails a bunch of extra crap you need to do and all but requires a guide in order to figure out what the game expects of you. The sort of thing a normal player would decide isn't worth it when there are other good endings which don't require half as much effort. So naturally, this is the one I went for. Spoilers for both the ending itself and how you achieve it. If you don't care or would prefer to figure it out yourself, skip ahead to my conclusion here. To start with, the world requires your reputation meter to be almost maxed out and for you to collect the 3 mystic treasures: the Sword Brunhild, the Grail,
I choose this one.
How did you know?
Well, I kind of figured the coffee mug that says Jesus.
and the Mystic Armband. There were originally 4 mystic treasures, but the mystic chains of encumbrance were stolen by a different Dark Lord of Evil. These steps alone are enough to qualify for, depending on your character's gender, the Emperor or Empress endings. But we still have to go even further beyond by having Tristan and Rowney be required recruits rather than optional ones, and then make the player collect all 12 Zodiac Stones. The latter being the biggest pain in the ass fetch quest in the entire game. In order to even begin collecting the Zodiac Stones, you need the Tablet of Yaru from the late game stage Shangri-La. But before you can get that, you need to track down 3 gems, which starts with getting some mercury from this monk by revisiting Pogrom Forest from way back near the beginning of the game. You then go visit his buddy in Delma Desert all the way on the other side of the game to get the Gem of Dune. Then go back to Pogrom Forest to get the Olden Orb. Then revisit Raihan Sea with both gems in your possession to get the Gem of Truth, before at last heading to Shangri-La to get the fucking tablet which will let you collect the damn Zodiac Stones already. I'm not even sure how the players are supposed to figure out where all the stones are to begin with. At least the initial fetch quest for the gems told you where to go next. Were players supposed to just canvas every map until they found them all? Because units still cost money to deploy on a conquered map, and as a reminder, reputation drains away every time it rolls over to the next day when revisiting a map. I mean, really, was this done purely to see how many losers would jump through all these hoops just for a different ending? Because if so, that's actually pretty damn funny. So, what do you get for all this effort? Nothing in the way of extra stages or big differences in the final stretch, if that's what you're asking. You still have to take Xytegenia by force, and don't make the same mistake I did and liberate any of the already revealed towns or temples on this map. The people here drink so much of the Kool-Aid that they see you as the villain and your reputation drops accordingly. Hidden towns and temples are fine for liberation, though. And once Empress Endora is out of the way, you have to sprint your way to a final confrontation with the real big bad, Rashidi, who orchestrated everything in order to revive the Lord of Destruction, Diablo. Wait, I thought he was the Lord of Terror and Baal was the Lord of Destruction. Of course, no matter how hard of an ass-kicking you deliver to Rashidi, the bastard still manages to summon Diablo so we can have a proper final boss.
我が名はディアブロ。我が望みは破壊。我が眠りを犯すべからず。
Really? That's the voice we're going with for the ultimate evil? For the sake of fairness, let me check something. Nope. This Diablo sounds scary as fuck in Japanese. And you know, for being an ultimate evil summoned from the Nether, this other Diablo kinda goes out like a chump.
King of the jungle, my ass!
It was actually Rashidi that gave me the most trouble. I had more than one unit totally wiped in a single battle with him. Fortunately, this isn't Fire Emblem, so there's no permadeath, and I was loaded up on so many healing and revive items that I was able to beat Rashidi by sheer attrition. But even with Diablo defeated and sealed away, the trauma of their experience leaves our heroes susceptible to further demonic influence, opening the door for the Lord of Terror's return in Diablo 2. Meanwhile, back in Ogre Battle, their Diablo's defeat is a much less somber, grimdark occasion, as the continent celebrates its liberation from the Xytegenian Empire's tyranny. Tristan takes his rightful place on the Zenobian throne with Rowney as his bride, while Europa heads off north to the plot of Ogre Battle 64 in search of a second E in her name. From here, if you've recruited the right optional characters, you'll get some bonus dialogue and a few teases of the events and tactics Ogre in the case of certain characters. Just gotta wait a little longer, Canopus, and then you'll be the coolest dude around. Ogre Battle: The March of the Black Queen is a strange little strategy RPG to say the least. An experimental mix of real-time strategy and automated RPG battles with one of the most unusual implementations of an alignment system in any game I've ever played. Yet it is nevertheless a very compelling experience once you've wrapped your head around its numerous mechanics. While I wouldn't go so far as to place it among the best of the best in the genre, Ogre Battle is definitely worth checking out if you enjoy other strategy RPGs, particularly if you recently enjoyed Unicorn Overlord and are curious about what inspired it. It's also definitely worth checking out Unicorn Overlord if you haven't already.
Is that why you and Lex spent all your days banging swords down at the shore?
You've seen that, have you?
Actually, obtaining a copy of Ogre Battle is the tricky part. Once upon a time, the Super Nintendo version was available on the Wii's Virtual Console, but these days there's no legal digital version out there, and the versions that actually came out in English command bullshit prices on eBay. In fact, I went so far as to buy my copy direct from Japan last year through the second-hand retailer Surigaya. They ship all over the world and frequently offer free shipping. I've only bought from them the one time so far, but if that time is anything to go by, I was impressed enough to say it's worth a try if you're looking to save a bit on Japanese games. As for where Ogre Battle as a series went from here, well, I've constantly brought up the next two games throughout this video, so you should already have an idea where it went. When I'll get around to them is the better question. How I managed to go this whole video without making a Star Wars joke regarding Ogre Battle being labeled as Episode 5 is another good one. And both have the same answer. I have no idea. I've got so many games I should follow up on, so many other games I want to cover, and in the course of this video taking an extra week longer than I intended, I kinda realized that I needed a break. So I'm gonna take a bit of a working vacation in August if you guys don't mind. Record some more footage, rebuild my script backlog so I'm not hastily writing the script of the next video while I'm editing the current one, and maybe brainstorm some ideas for other types of videos I could do on this channel. So with that, I will just say goodbye, and I will see you guys in September.